Welcome back, basketball fans. So now we know Boston versus Dallas. Not quite the way I was predicting earlier on in the series when I was, or in the playoffs. If you looked at my earlier videos and my predictions and my breakdown for the whole playoffs, I had Denver versus Boston in the final. So I was half right. Boston did get through. Obviously, we do realize, and we did talk about this year, the fact that the East was a little weak and that it looked like it was going to be easy runnings for Boston to get to the final. Excuse me. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did and looked dominant in the process. On the West, it was a much murkier situation. Obviously, Denver was the returning champions from last year. But then we had teams like Oklahoma, who were the number one team in the West this year. Then you had teams like Minnesota, who came out of nowhere, putting together what was really a great squad, great depth, and just a very good team overall. And it showed. And the great young star who I was touting before the NBA season this year ended up living up to expectations. Just the way I broke it down, he did it. He didn't get to the finals. He may not be the next Michael Jordan at this point, but he's still only 22 years of age. So Ant-Man will have a long career ahead of him. And then, of course, we had the Clippers and Phoenix, two teams that were built up to be super teams, as well as the Lakers. And, of course, Golden State Warriors, who obviously all of those teams are getting a little long in the tooth. And that was pretty obvious in this year's playoffs. The team that on paper potentially look good and a team I like, but I didn't think they would do this well. And sometimes things just fall into place perfectly. And for Dallas, that's what happened. Obviously, Kyrie, Luka dominating. The key role players playing really well. And the chemistry has been fantastic. And luckily, they didn't have to play Denver. They played against an old Clippers who Luka does well against. Kyrie stepped up, played well. And then obviously they got by a young team that lacked height off the bench with Oklahoma. And then, of course, Minnesota, which played well against Denver. But matchups are key in the NBA playoffs, right? If you look at any breakdown to any particular team situation, it's always about the matchup. So now we get to Boston and Dallas. And this is where the interest picks up exponentially. Obviously, these are two great teams. Boston is the favorite by the bookies and by most pundits for obvious reasons, right? Their top six players are fantastic. Their top five players, really the versatility they have as a team is incredible, right? You can get points from everywhere. They're all good shooters, all six of them. You have height. Everybody's tall in the team. There's no short guards. Even the guards are tall in this team, so you have a lot of length to play the passing lanes. They're a young team outside, of course, of Al Horford, who brings experience, which isn't a bad thing. Sometimes you need a little bit of that. But the problem I had with Boston, as we'll be discussing moving forward, was their lack of depth. I just felt that this team lacked a little bit of depth, and eventually this would come out to be a serious situation regarding how they would do against better teams with more depth. And the Western Conference, which generally are better teams with more depth. But we'll get to this. Obviously, for Luka, this is a seminal year. This is a guy who, coming out of the NBA draft, got tons of attention, but was always sort of scrutinized, always criticized, was never going to be able to live up to the hype, right? Went on to win Rookie of the Year. Showed that Dallas's trade with Atlanta to get Luka was a stroke of brilliance. Luka went out and was one of the key players in the NBA. And year after year, this being his sixth year, has just lived up to expectations every year, right? Really making Dallas a very, very interesting team. Obviously, last year they struggled a bit. They lost a few players. They brought in Kyrie, and it took a while for him to embed in the team and for them to find out what kind of role players they needed to bring out the best in them. And here we are. Now they're doing it. This year, Luka was on pace to be the third player in NBA history to average a triple-double. He fell a little bit short, 34 points, 9.5 assists, and like 9 rebounds, falling behind both Oscar Robertson and Russell Westbrook. But still, his numbers should have been good enough for him to win MVP. But because of the constant ridicule and criticism that he gets, people always look to the new guy, whether that's SDG or whoever else it may be, right? You had the top guys who were established, like obviously Embiid, the Joker, and Giannis. But then the young guys came up. Oh, now you got Ant, and now SDG, right? And all these new guys coming, and consistently he sort of pushed back. Well, he's good, but if you're going to build a team, who would you rather build around, right? And this is the kind of back and forth the media has really been pushing consistently. Last year, of course, we had the big situation where it came down to race. The only reason these white guys are winning is because they're white, not because they're good. Joker went on to obviously win his third MVP and win an NBA title, and win an MVP titles MVP, and put up numbers that we haven't really seen in basketball history. Luka right now is putting up numbers that are incomparable, right? When you compare Boston to this team, Dallas to Boston, obviously this team look at them, scary. Depth, height, shooting ability, versatility. Boston is really what should be considered a super team. The one thing that's kind of stopping Boston from really getting their recognition is Tatum. The fact that Tatum, who is supposed to be the next superstar in the NBA, has kind of choked under pressure on other occasions in the NBA playoffs. Obviously, last year losing to Denver. A few years before that, losing to Golden State Warriors, right? If they lose this year to Luka, you can imagine the kickback that's going to specifically be directed to Tatum, right? Because they're putting players around him to be better. And that's what you see here. Obviously, this team is centered on Tatum. The rest of these players are there to help him reach his potential and the team to reach their potential. So when people talk about this team being the team that should win the NBA playoffs, I don't disagree, right? I didn't think they were going to beat Denver because we saw how Denver dealt with them last year. That confidence, the matchups. I know they brought in Porzingis, who's obviously a tall player and can obviously step out and hit the three. So in theory, he may have been a player that could have helped them get over the hump against Denver. I don't know if that's true. I don't think physically that he could stop the Joker from getting in the paint and doing what he does. As far as him just staying on the outside and pulling the Joker out to defend him, I don't know how effective that would have been. Of course, we're not going to see it. That's not the way it played out. So now we have a completely different scenario. But still, nonetheless, a very interesting one. When we look at most people and they're talking about how Boston is going to defend this team, that's one of the key things we constantly hear. Who's Tatum going to cover? Who are the two guards going to cover? Most people feel the two guards are going to start on Kyrie and Luka, and Tatum is probably going to be dealing with Jones, and then Brown is probably going to be dealing with Washington. And then, of course, that leaves Gafford and Lively to deal with Porzingis if he does come back healthy, which we do anticipate him coming back. So right there, the matchup is pretty interesting. Of course, they are happy having Brown and Green deal with these two forwards from Dallas because they're not the biggest scorers. They're not going to have to work that hard defensively. So that means they're going to have more ability to do well offensively, putting pressure on Dallas's defense, not being in so much foul trouble as either because they don't really need to key in on their defensive position. Jones and Green Washington are probably going to mostly stand outside the three-point range to open up the key for both Luka and Kyrie. Penetration, if they can get the double team to kick it out to one of these two guys to hit the shot. Washington's done well. Jones is not like a high level 3-point shooter. Obviously, Dallas has quite a few other players on the bench who are more focused on 3-point shooting, Hardaway and others. And then, of course, you got Lively as backup for the big man here, number 21, Gafford, who's been really good. So the depth potentially is what I saw as the difference. The fact that this team can throw through potentially 9 players. You also have the big German player who obviously was out earlier in the year because of an injury. He's the kind of guy that matches up perfect with Porzingis because he's going to stand out there at 3-point range. You're not going to get the defensive sort of performance you get from Gafford and Lively, but you don't expect to get it from him. What he brings is a fact that he's able to spread the floor, right? Something Lively and Gafford aren't able to do. You can run pick and rolls with them, but they're not going to actually take the 3-point shot and spread the floor, whereas he does, right? So he definitely makes the Dallas team's offense far more versatile. Not as great defensively, but that's the whole point. They have so much depth, they can change the rotation to change and fit certain circumstances. I feel Boston, though, that's definitely a weakness that they're going to have to deal with, right? So the question comes down to which team stars are really going to be able to dominate and carry their team in this year's playoffs. Tatum and Brown, Kyrie and Luka. Both of these tandems have been playing fantastic, right? Both putting up over, I think, 60 something points on average between them. Very high averages between the two players. Obviously, Luka is leading the playoffs in every category offensively: rebounding, assists, steals, field goals made, free throws made, 3-pointers made, scoring average, and assists. So we see how well he's played. But with him, he's had an injury the whole playoffs. His knee has been really dodgy, and we really saw it in that Oklahoma series. Obviously, it looked a little better because he wasn't pushed as hard against Minnesota. Now he has a whole week to recover. So one would hope that this version of Luka that we're going to get in this playoffs is going to be at his best. And we know during the 2 games that Dallas played Boston this year, Luka put up incredible numbers. I think 36 points, 12.5 rebounds, and like 12 assists, right? Phenomenal numbers. Phenomenal. Boston, of course, won those 2 games, but the first game was with a completely different Dallas team, and the second game was obviously at home in Boston, and when these players were just integrating into the roster. And I don't know if Jones had been turned into a starter on the team at that point. Somebody can let me know in the comments if he was or not. So Luka is proving why I felt he should have won this year's MVP. He's a horse that offensively cannot be stopped. Not only does he hit game-winning 3-pointers in defensive players of the year's face to end the game, but he's making defensive stops, and he's getting the ball in his teammates' hands to make big shots. And that's what he's always done, right? And that's why when people say he over-controls the ball, it's hard to compare him to, say, a guy like Carmelo Anthony, who was similar in that fashion. The difference was Carmelo didn't rebound as much, was more one-dimensional in how he was scoring his points, and wasn't even close to having the offense run through him as effectively because he did not average double digits in assists, right? So, I thought that Carmelo was a ball stopper. I don't think you can necessarily say that about Luka. Luka is more like an Allen Iverson, right? As far as a ball stopper in that fashion, a guy who is the main person controlling the ball, controlling the offense. Offense throws through him. Everybody else benefits from his distribution of the ball, kind of like Harden as well. The difference is he's bigger than both Harden and obviously way bigger than Allen Iverson. Not as quick and athletic, but obviously physically more indomitable, right? People are talking about him being covered by both Tatum and Brown, as well as the 2 guards, right? Saying this is what's going to really benefit Boston. The fact that they have these four players they can rotate through to play Luka, and physically that could tire him out, and have an effect in a 7-game series. And that's true. That may very well be true, right? We have to wait and see how it pans out. All I have to say is so far, we've never seen that from Luka, whether we're talking about international tournaments, whether we're talking about international leagues, winning MVPs for Real Madrid, or even so far in the NBA. But this may be the off chance that this is something that benefits Boston. As I said, bench is going to be the difference, I think, in this series. When we look at, obviously, let me just get my face out of the screen so we can see all of this a little better. There we go. So when you look at Dallas, you have Luka, Dante Exum, who's played well. He didn't play so good in Minnesota, but in series prior to that, defensively, he was giving them a lot of length, also hitting big three-pointers. You have Gafford, Josh Green, who played very well at times, still a young player, only 23 years of age, athletic. Tim Hardaway, obviously a guy that could score 20 points at a drop of a hat. Then you have Jaden Harden, who's played well, hit some big shots, still a kid, only 21 years old. Kyrie Irving, Derek Jones, that's my man, Maxi Kleber, the power forward, 6'10", 32-year-old German. Derek Lively, Dwight Powell, who has always been a real key part to Dallas's team. Obviously, now that you have Lively and Gafford, and as well as a versatile player that can really help your offense move in Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell hasn't played nearly as much as he has previously. But to have him on your bench, as well as a guy like Markieff Morris, a big body, thick guy who can shoot a three-pointer, you're probably not going to use him very much unless you get into serious foul trouble. But knowing you have him, a very experienced player coming off the bench who can throw his body around, who can rebound, and can actually spread the floor to open up the lanes for guys like Kyrie Irving and Luka, that's great. You have the young man, Prosper, who obviously they have big hopes for being that Jones position in the future, and hopefully he develops into that. He's still just a 21-year-old kid. But when you think of that, you got Luka, Exum, Gafford, Green, Hardaway, Hardy, Irving, Jones, Kleber, Lively. That's 10 players that get regular minutes, as well as then you have Dwight Powell out in 11th, who, depending on forward foul trouble, is a defensive player who, offensively doesn't help you as much, but defensively will work hard, and he will be a great backup for both Lively and Gafford. So 11 players that you can bring off the bench that can contribute to this Dallas team, right? That's why when I think about Dallas winning, not only do they have these two stars that cannot be stopped offensively, but you have this depth, right, on the bench, which I think is going to be key. When you look at Boston, on the other hand, that's an area I thought from the beginning of the season that was lacking. I don't think they really corrected that area in the offseason, right? And maybe that's because their payload is so expensive on their top 4 players that they don't have a lot of flexibility to add key role players to the squad. But when you think of Brown, then you think of Sam Hauser, Holiday, Horford, Luke Cornett, right? And then you have Porzingis, Pritchard. And then after that, who is it? Tatum and White. And that's 9 players right there, which isn't too bad. Better actually than I thought, right? Because we know that they have a 6-man rotation that's very strong with Brown, Tatum, Derek White, Holiday, and Porzingis. And then Horford is the 6th man coming off the bench. And then you have these other 3 guys coming off the bench in Peyton Pritchard, the 6'1" point guard, Luke Cornett, the 7'1" center, who obviously played quite a bit since Porzingis was hurt. And then, of course, Sam Hauser, the 6'7" small forward. So you got a big man a small forward, and a point guard. But all three of those players are pretty limited defensively. They can all shoot. Offensively, they can contribute to your team. And nobody thinks Boston's team is lacking offensively, right? But off the bench, as far as defense and rebounding, that's an area where if you get into foul trouble with your big men in Boston, you're going to be playing a very small lineup, very small, right? And the funny thing is, if you keep Lively in the roster for Dallas, I don't think that small squad will hurt Dallas at all. I don't think it'll be too difficult for them to deal with. I don't think Lively is going to be really uh, out of position where now he can be targeted. Just the opposite, right? I think defensively, he's going to really clog up the lane and stop that Boston from really being able to penetrate, which will be able to help Dallas focus on stopping Boston's three-point shooting. We know Boston really lives and dies off their three-point shooting. And as I just told you, the team offensively looks great. You have 9 players on the team that are great shooters. You can't say that about Dallas, right? Dallas, you got good shooters in Luka. Exum can hit open shots. Green occasionally can hit open shots. Hardaway is probably a specialist. Hardy, hits his shots occasionally. Irving, Jones, inconsistent. Kleba, pretty good for a big man. And then, of course, there you are. 8 guys that can consistently shoot three-pointers. Boston is obviously a team you would rank much higher as far as the amount of three-pointers they shot and the percentage they hit and your confidence in them shooting it as well. But my question is, what's going to happen in a 7-game series when you need to make adjustments consistently, when players are going to get into foul trouble? How are you going to adjust and compensate for these issues in a tough series where the coaching maneuvering is going to be probably one of the key things that's going to play out? Luka, 4th player ever to drop 450, 150, 150 in a single season postseason, joining the Joker, LeBron, and Larry Bird. But people question him being an MVP caliber player. Yet he's ranked right here with guys who've won multiple MVPs. I think Bird won 3. I think LeBron won 3, maybe 4. And the Joker just won his 3rd. Luka, 0. He could have easily won 1 MVP by now. And I think this year was definitely the year for that. That's why I hope he does go on to win this NBA playoff series, because what that would do would just be the nail in the coffin, so to speak. It would be here, guys, what else do you want me to do? I won the NBA playoffs. I lead the league in scoring. I was second in assists at a 6'7", 6'8", point guard, right? And I still almost averaged double-digit in rebounds. And my defense numbers have really improved, specifically in the postseason, right? Because that's definitely where these are the things you need to improve more so than during the regular season, which is a bit of a long, strenuous grind. But I am thinking Boston is going to win. That is where I'm leaning. But at the same time, my question is, how's Boston's depth going to hurt them in a 7-game series? Obviously, I'd love Luka to win and Dallas, but at this point, Boston does seem to be the odds-on favorite. They are the team that I would have thought would win. Prior to this, I was thinking whatever team came from the West is probably the team that's going to win, because I wasn't so confident in Boston's bench and how they're going to perform in a 7-game series. So far, they haven't really been pushed, so we haven't really seen how they're going to adapt. But I have to give them the edge in this series because I feel that the matchup is good for them. Offensively, they're a team that's going to be able to put up points equal to Dallas. And one of the keys is going to be if they're able to have big enough leads going into the 4th, where now, the pressure is on Dallas and not on them. They don't need to hit the big shot. They don't need to make the big play. Obviously, they have home court advantage, which is going to be very big as well. We also have the good rivalries. Porzingis playing against his Dallas squad. Kyrie Irving playing against his ex-Boston squad. So that's going to make this a very emotional series. People talked about how this could potentially really fire up Luka, who, needs a catalyst to motivate him. And when he sees this negativity going towards his teammate Kyrie Irving, who probably is going to be pretty chilled and relaxed because he is a little more mature than he used to be, but yet this is going to be what fires up Luka, puts the fire under his ass. As they say, for Luka, it'd be great for him to win an NBA playoff, but he's still young. This is the first finals he's been in. So if he does fall short, people are going to understand that, it was a big ask at this point, and they overperformed really when you think about the year. For Boston, this is must win. If Tatum and Boston lose to this Dallas squad, for Tatum, it's going to be devastating on his overall perception as a great NBA player. He's going to be looked at as a guy that's great during the regular season, but chokes in the playoffs. Just doesn't have the killer instinct to bring your team to that top spot, right? You're just not an ultimate winner. You're not one of those guys, right? You're just not in the formation of the great Boston players that came before you, right? The Allens, the Birds, the Garnetts, the McHales, right? And I don't think that's true or accurate, but at the same time, that's the kind of pressure that's really going to be on Tatum in these playoffs. For Luka, he's a man that is overlooked, downplayed, dismissed by most of the media. So if he doesn't win, they're going to be like, yeah, see, he's great, but he ain't that great. Whereas if Tatum doesn't win, 3 strikes, you're out. It's going to be devastating for Boston, for the money they invested in this team. And it would be really, the coach would probably be out the door as quick as you could say his name. So it's going to be a really interesting playoff series. Obviously, there's a lot of storylines at work here. So let me know what you think. Who do you think is going to win? As I said, I'm favoring Boston at this point, but I'm hoping for Dallas. But you can't always get what you need, get what you want, but you might get what you need. So we'll find out what I need in this playoff series. I'm just hoping it's a good, entertaining series. I'd love it to go 7 games and have this drama really work out. And hopefully that's what we get.